they get us to succeed. And they succeeded in getting us to like value other human beings. So we value concern for others higher than any previous generation. And the other thing that we value higher than any previous generation is humor. And that really stands out to me, and it spoke to me, and the way it spoke to me was that sort of post-Copenhagen, when I tried to engage with young people, mostly in my creative circles, who hadn't been engaged in political or activist work, I found that they were all interested. They just simply didn't know how to engage, and they found the issues overwhelming. And this led me to come to see, to basically redefine apathy, which is a word that's really commonly applied to our generation. Is that I came to see apathy as actually a form of self-defense. Because I think most of us, as young people, know how profoundly messed up the world is. But the fact of the matter is, if you think about it for a long time, it gets really overwhelming. And if you're not engaged in any of the work that you're all engaged in, it's even more overwhelming. It's such a weight because you're not doing anything. So I came to see apathy as just that, as self-defense, like tuning out for our own mental health. And after Copenhagen, I was so depressed I actually went to see a doctor, which I'd never done before. Like, you know, had a very pleasant middle-class upbringing, never any mental health problems. But yeah, I was in a really bad place after Copenhagen, and went to see a doctor. And the first thing he prescribed me was to stop reading the newspaper. And he was totally serious about it. He was like, "You clearly get overwhelmed with the state of the world, and you need to like just disengage from that a little bit." And I tried that, but like I couldn't keep it up because, you know, this is my life, this is the work that I do. So to me, that really confirmed apathy as self-defense. If we have doctors telling young people to stop reading the newspaper for their own mental well-being, I think it's pretty fair to understand that, yeah, I think apathy doesn't exist because it's constantly defined, but it's really self-defense. So how do we break through that? So since then, with the CHC, we do a lot of creative work developing campaigns and actions for organizations. I've also received my direct action trainer training from an organization called the Ruckus Society, which Josh Russell spoke earlier, or on the keynote on Friday. He's a big part of that society, and they do a lot of direct action training, but they really go well into principles of creative activism. And then I'm also an action coordinator and what's called a thought stylist with the YESLAB, which is an organization based out of New York. It's founded by two creative activists known as the Yes Men, who have become very well known in the last 15 years for their particular brand of creative activism, and in the last 3 years have founded an organization whose sole purpose is to try to teach these tactics to other activists, other organizations, and other communities. So I coordinate actions there and facilitate those relationships. And then finally, something I'll go into is a piece that I went through last year, which I was pretty excited about, and I feel like this is a crowd that will appreciate it, is last year I studied for a while under a man named Philippe Gaulier, who is basically the world's foremost clown. And he runs a school in Paris and London called the Gaulier School. And he's taught a lot of amazing clowns, modern clowns, if you will, but he teaches like traditional sort of French clown. And he most famously, in terms of names you might recognize, taught Sacha Baron Cohen. So Sacha Baron Cohen, who is Borat, and also talk a bit about how, yeah, those practices, which are quite old, are being used in a contemporary context for very political reasons. Anyways, so I'm probably scattered, because as I said, I've never done this work before. Okay, so you're probably wondering why this photo is out. This is the Great Wall of China, which maybe you recognize. And I actually consider this to be one of comedy's greatest political victories. And there's a story here, and it's hard to fact check it because it's such an old story. But basically, the story goes, there's the emperor in China who was planning to build this huge wall, and it happened over the course of a very long time. But you know, there's lots of starvation in China, lots of poverty, and a lot of people thought that building this wall was a really stupid idea. But there's one particular fool, who was basically the emperor's fool, who really thought it was a stupid idea, and would constantly make fun of him for the fact that he had taken on this ridiculous project. And it was basically this one joke he kept making year after year after year after year. As you can see, though, the wall did get built. So you're probably wondering why this is considered a victory. Well, what happened was after the wall was built, the emperor then announced that he was going to paint this wall. And this fool had made such a big joke out of this whole project that everyone already thought it was so dumb and such a joke that when the painting was brought up, people were having none of it. So the comedy had laid a foundation for an uprising which stopped the painting of the Great Wall of China. So that's an old story. I don't actually know if it's entirely true, but so where are we going from here? Okay. So yeah, this is a quote from Sacha Baron Cohen about Philippe Gaulier, and it'll speak to kind of two divergent paths in terms of like comedic practice that we're going to go through. So what do the characters of Ali G and Borat have in common? They are both idiots. Philippe Gaulier is the greatest living teacher of clown in modern theater. He's also the funniest man I've ever met. Students travel from all around the world to spend as little as a month with him. I owe my career and the discovery of my own inner idiot to Philippe Gaulier. He has and always will be the inspiration for my work. So what Gaulier teaches, amongst many other things, is basically two forms of comedic theater. So the first is clown, which is clown, which is the traditional clown, which we call basically the beautiful idiot. And the other is bouffon, or in English what we call buffoon. And buffoon is quite different. And buffoon is actually what Borat is, for instance. And buffoon in the Middle Ages in France came out of the fact that people who had physical disabilities, mental disabilities, basically were deemed unworthy to be part of society, were cast out. And as the story goes, they all ended up living in these ghettos around marshes and swamps. This is the way the story goes. So they all lived around these swamps and these marshes, and they weren't allowed to participate in society. And for this reason, they were really bitter and really angry, and really had a lot to vent on the society that had cast them out. And what they would do is they would spend their whole year preparing for one night. And that one night came once a year, and it was when these people, these outcasts, were invited back into society, and they were put on stage as freaks. And the highest of the society, the royalty and the nobility, would laugh at them. So this happened once a year, and they would practice for it. This is what their whole life involved. They would just be ready for this one night. And so they became amazing performers, but they all, keep in mind, have physical disabilities, which is why they were being brought out to be laughed at. And what they would craft is a performance that was so subtle that it had everyone laughing. So everyone was laughing, but at the end of the night, when they would go back to the swamp, the nobility, the people who had cast them out, would sit back and realize that the performance that they'd just been laughing at was actually portraying them, right? That these disabled people who had been cast out had actually come up with a performance that was meant to portray the nobility. And no one had really noticed it, except it took a while to sink in. And the hope that the bouffon had was that the nobility would become so depressed and ashamed that they had spent this whole evening laughing at themselves amongst the rest of society that they would commit suicide. And that was actually their goal. That was the goal of the bouffon. Was to practice this once a year and come into society and reflect back all that they saw as ugly, right? And so when you think of Borat and what Borat does, that's why to me he stands out as a classic example of a bouffon, but in a very contemporary context. If you've seen the Borat movie, he's kind of reflecting back the worst of American culture, but reveling in it himself. I also think Stephen Colbert is a classic bouffon. He's kind of adopted this voice and is reflecting back a lot of politics that clearly he doesn't agree with in order to sort of shame him. So this is sort of practice number one. I said there's like two practices. So bouffon, as I just explained, actually has even older traditions. There's the tradition of the Zen fool. So there's all sorts of classifications of different Zen masters. And one of the rarest that's not talked about very often is the classification of the Zen fool. And the Zen fool was usually a middle-aged man who was overweight and would just wander the countryside drinking and would play with children. That was his whole life. So he was sort of like a clown. He would just entertain children. But what he would do is, using this kind of clown mask, if you will, he would find his way into communities, and he would try to like skewer and take down leadership. that needed to be taken down a couple of